Hello and welcome to our video, Memories. This is a celebration of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park's 75th birthday. I hope that you'll enjoy these stories told by older folks who lived in the mountains before it became a national park. My name is Veta and this is a production of the Pigeon Forge Public Library. We're talking with Miss Martha Oakley Rawlings, and this is a part of a series that is we're celebrating the 75th birthday of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Can you give me your full name and how old you are?
What?
What is your full name?
Full name? Martha L. Mana Oakley was my name before I married, of course. That's my maiden name. And I was born at the
tell me about, how long did you live at Cherokee Orchard?
Oh, gosh, until we had to move out. You know, till the park took over and everybody had to move out, you know, because the park, when Roosevelt was here, I was here when Ford, you know, was here, and I was at the dedication, you know, for the park, but I wasn't, you know, and I just watched, you know, what that's on. I was just a bystander.
Did you see President Roosevelt?
Oh, yeah. And I saw him when he dedicated the park. But we didn't know we was going to have to move out and give up our homes to him. But it turned out we had a lot better after the park took over than we had before. But still, I like the old way. And I was here when the earthquake happened. I was 4 or 5 years old, and we had our first earthquake. And the chimney, the rocks fell out of our chimney, and Lucinda and I had gone to the bathroom. We didn't have bathrooms then. The girls went on the right hand of the house, and the mom others the left. And so that rocks just started piling, just shaking on that chimney. And we didn't know what to think, you know. And Mama come running out the door, and she said, "Oh, Lord, children, come in here. we're having, the Lord's coming, and, you know, we're not going to, the Lord is coming, and taking, you know, because all that shaking and stuff." And we run to her, of course, so we run in, you know, and I said, and then we didn't have it didn't come, or nothing else happens, you know. And next day or two, you know, because the news, you know, was not plentiful then, and they told us, you know, about Reelfoot Lake, and sure enough, there wasn't ever a water there till that earthquake, and that was a miracle, of course. The Lord made.
Well, tell me a little bit about your dad. A lot of people know about Wiley Oakley. What did he do?
He loved everybody, and he made especially time for anyone who wanted to know about the mountains, and he loved the mountains. You know, he's always hunting for his mother, you know, because they told him, instead of telling him she died and they buried her and all that, he didn't know all that. So naturally, he was hunting for her in the mountains.
Oh, how bad.
And that's in the articles, you know, where Vincent, you know, and Ellen had.
Mm-hmm. Did he took people on tours through the mountains, didn't he?
Oh, honey, he lived they kept us up. You know, with him touring, taking all the tourists, you know, he knowed every peak and all the hollers and everywhere. One time he took me with him and he left me after we got the tow sacks full of greens and stuff. And he put me by a tree, and I said, yeah, I'd be okay. You know, he said, you'll be all right now. And he said, I'll keep yelling, you know, so you'll know I'm close. And after a while, he quit yelling. So I got scared, and I climbed the tree and left my teeth at the bottom. And when I never was so glad, honey. I prayed he'd come back for me. And I heard him after a while, real weak, you know, and boy, I come down out of that tree. I didn't want him to know I'd been.
Tell me a little bit about the chores you had to do at home. What kind of chores did you have to do?
Oh, that'll kill you. I hated that homework, you know, and my Lucinda got to cook all the time, you know, and my job was washing dishes and washing diapers, and I hated that old diaper business. Oh, it was so cold out there, we had to break the ice to wash them diapers, you know, and it's just cold as whist, and I hated my jobs at home, at the house, and I got out of there as quick as I could and as much as I could.
What were some of your best memories of living in the park?
My best memories? When I was gathering all that stuff with my daddy in the mountains. When I could stay all day in the mountains, I loved it because I didn't have to do that stuff at home.
Tell me your full name.
Zenith Daniel Whaley.
And when were you born and where were you born?
Oh, goodness gracious. I was born
He's born in
in the Bear Pin Gap to me, right between the waters, the head of Indian Creek and the head of Big Laurel Creek. And they call it James Gap now, but then it was Bear Pin Gap to me.
And they say you're the oldest man still living
I'm
that
the
ever lived
oldest
in the
man
park.
living that went to active man that started the school in Greenboro.
And you're the oldest minister in this
I'm the
county.
oldest ordained minister in the state of Tennessee.
And who was your mom and dad?
Lincoln Whaley and Ethel Mannon Whaley. When we lived there, when I was 2.5 years old, I run off from home and to meet my grandmother. My mother went upstairs to get the dirty clothes, and she said, Zenith, said, you stay right here with little sister. She was in a little crib, like she was 6 months old. She said, now don't you go out. You stay right here with little sister. Said, because your grandma's coming today, and grandma always brought me a treat when she come. Now I'm just 2.5 years old, and if she hadn't said grandma's coming, I'd have stayed right there with little sister. But as soon as she got out of my sight, I hit her out of there, and down that road I went, running as hard as I could go, with long, short shirt tail with scallops in the and the chestnut burrs, the old chestnut burrs, year old, they'd get in my heel, the old bars, I called them, and I'd have to sit down and pick them out of my heel, and I'd get up and run again. And you know, I was a half a mile down that road, and I met Perry Gray. And Perry, I had my back to him, and I was down picking them pricks out of my heel, out of them chest burrs. He said, "What are you doing, little man?" I said, "I'm picking these old," I called them chest burrs, picking these old chest burrs out of my heel. He come up, hunkered down, and he helped me. Took his finger and helped me pick them out of my heel. He says, "Little man," he said, "does your mama know where you are?" I said, "No." He said, "Where are you going anyhow?" I said, "I was going to meet Grandma, and she lived 2.5 miles from where we did." And it was about 8 o'clock when I was going. Well, he said, "Your grandma lives a long ways." I know, but I said, "I'm going to meet her. She always brings me sweet crackers, these graham crackers, you know. She'd bring me some graham crackers every time she'd come get them at the store." Well, he said, "Your mother will be worried about you." Said, "Don't you guess you better just go back with me?" I said, "No, I'm going to meet Grandma." And I started. He just reached out and got me by the arm. Boy, I had a fit on him, I'm telling you. I tried to bite him, and I kicked him, and I scratched him, and he just laid right with me. And so finally he just reached down and just get me up in his arms. And my mother had went down the other way towards Tom Ray Fields looking for me. I was barefooted, but it was dry. She went across that Indian Creek, and it was damp there, and she could have seen my track in the damp place. Then she whirled and come back, and she was coming down the other way then. And we met her. Her face was as red, just looked like it just light a match in it. And I quit eating on Perry then. I thought, oh, I've had it now. She told me not to go out of the house. So Perry carried me onto the house, down into the yard. And my mother was so proud to see me. She didn't even spank me. But she got me down and told me all the bad things that could have happened to me. Said some old dog could have come out, you know, and jumped on me just to eat me up. Said all the bad things that could have happened to me. And I listened her out too. And you know, since she didn't spank me, I never did run off.
Since you were 14 years old when you moved out of that park,
Yeah.
how did you feel about it becoming a national
Oh, I
park?
hated it. I hated it. And I hated it for the next almost 20 years. I had a grudge against it. But when I come back here, I got just as close to park as I could get. I said, I'm here to stay, and in a couple of years, they give me a job.
What was it like when they asked the families to leave? Your whole community disappeared.
Oh, whoa. That was just like, well, I just can't tell you the feel.
Mm-hmm.
Just come along here and said, well, you've got to go, take it or leave it, $10 an acre.
Dan Bryson Connor.
And Dan, when were you born?
When? I was born in June the 12th of 27 at Smoky, North Carolina.
And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
2 brothers, besides there's 3 of us, 2 brothers older than I.
And you lived in Smokemont. Is that the campground today?
It is. Well, it's where you enter into the campground. It's where the store, or our store and home was.
And what did that store look like? Was it a big store or?
Well, it was a big store when Dad bought the store in 1921. And of course, that was back when the Champion Fiber Company was going full force with their lumber cutting and band mill and sawmill and the big lumber yard in where the campground is at the present time. And of course, during that time, there's a fire, got part of the store, burned it off, saved the store. Then their home was okay.
And you told me that a post office and a barber shop was connected to that.
That's what burnt off the side of the store, but the men wasn't working that day, and they bucket brigaded the water from the river to keep it from catching the main body of the store. And
And how long did you say you got to live in the park after it was become a park? How long did you get to stay there? What year did you move out?
had to move out in December of 48.
48.
Yeah.
And you were already married by that time.
Yes. I went to school there in Brazos City in the last 4 years, and had to drive the bus or not go to school the last 2 years.
And how long a trip was that for you?
20 miles one way.
And that's where you met your wife at
Yes,
school?
she was going to school at Brazos City High School there, Swain High, and she was a year ahead of me in school. So when she got out of the high school, she went to Western Carolina College for a couple of years. During that time, when I graduated, I went into the Navy.
Yeah.
So when I got out of the service, in 46 we got married, and we lived there at the store, or at the home place, until 48, when Dad had to move. They wouldn't lease him the store anymore after that year, and so he built a house here at PIgeon Forge that I live in now.
Oh. As you lived in that store, or next to the store, what did it look like out front? Was you close to the river, or was there a road?
Yeah,
that
the
came
river
out?
was in front of the store. In the beginning, before it got growing too fast in there, the railroad cars would deliver our groceries to the store right up to the platform in front of the store. The roads wasn't completed up that side for automobiles. There was a bridge across where they could get across with some people could get a vehicle crossing up the back side of the railroad tracks.
Up to Newfound Gap, what we know as Newfound
They
Gap today.
would be the starting of when the road was started being built up through there.
Do you
They had-
remember who built that road? Did they hire CCC boys or
No,
prisoners, or who
they
built
had
that road?
a contractor, I believe was out of Asheville, North Carolina, that did the biggest part of the road building above what we call Kip Art.
Park Prom.
Yes. And then part of it in between Smokemont and the Kip Art too, they did do the work, because the old road that they had went up the backside of the Lufty River, up through to, and when you got up so far, it was just a horse trail or a sled trail
Yeah.
going across the mountain,
Yeah.
coming across through by Indian Gap and down by the chimneys. But then when they started with their road building, the contractors built, I guess, from Smokemont all the way through to Newfound Gap.
Yeah. And then when did who came into what's now the park first? Was it your great-grandfather? Who
My
was the first one that you know of?
great-great-father, I remember, had the farm from Collins's Creek up about, I don't know, half a mile or something like that up on the right-hand side going toward the Newfound Gap. And it was just tillable, a lot of it was, some of it's pasture, and others timber. But at the old home place is where my granddaddy and his family lived, and there was 4 boys and 3 girls.
Yeah.
And they were all born there in Lefty River, their home place there.
Okay. Can you tell me your full name and how old you are?
Nancy Ruby Owen Williams, 78 years old.
Okay, and where did you live inside the Great Smoky Mountains?
It was just up from Gatlinburg, what they call Cherokee Orchard. And it was a huge orchard. I don't know just how many trees they had, but it was, a lot of people came from all over the United States and sometimes other countries to get apples in the fall.
And who operated this orchard?
Mr. Mac Whittle. He's the one that helped at the operations of the national park, along with Mr. Ball and Mr. Gallion from Knoxville.
Mr. What was the last name?
Gallion,
Gallion.
G-A-L-L-I-O-N,
Gallion, okay. And Cherokee Orchard, for the people who don't know, to get to that site today, you would go up by the Cherokee Orchard Motor Nature Trail,
Yes,
or like you're going to Roaring
And it
Fork.
goes right by the orchard, where the orchard used to be. And there was a big apple barn, and they had a big basement where they kept apples stored in the winter time. And you met a lot of people from different states and other places. And if my mother and dad would say, "Don't talk to strangers," I wouldn't never talk to nobody, because that's all we had was we could be out anywhere, and we talked to a lot of strangers. They'd talk to us, because we was children. We would talk to.
But see, today that's what parents tell their children. You can't talk
Yeah.
to strangers. But in those days, that's all you saw.
That's all we saw, strangers, and you got used to them and lived with them. You liked them, because you saw them every day.
Do you remember anybody unusual or anybody special that you might have seen come through the orchard?
Let's see. There was a lady, she came, she was hiking on the Mount Lincoln Trail, and she got off the trail and fell and broke her leg. And so the park rangers, they came, and they got my dad to go help them carry her out. So they carried her out in a sitting chair, and they'd get on both sides of the chair and walk her down so they could get to the hospital.
I bet that was a sight for a young person to see, wasn't it?
Yes.
Now, tell me how your family came to live at Cherokee Orchard. Tell me who your parents were.
Oh, my father was Thomas Brazelton Owenby.
Thomas, what was his middle name?
Brazelton.
Thomas
Thomas
Brazelton.
Brazelton Owenby. My mother was Mary Lydia Ogle.
And Thomas, he went by Braz, didn't he?
Yes,
Braz Owenby.
everybody called him Braz.
Mhm.
He was the foreman there at the orchard, and his duties were to see that people were hard, and he kept records of the daily
Freedom or
house
anything?
sometimes people would come to go anywhere in the orchard, in the fall and pick up the ground apples, and my father, he'd tell us that you go help those people pick up those apples, so we'd go help the people pick up the apples.
Did they sell those or they were free?
They were cheaper because they were ground apples,
Oh.
but they were good, but they just fell on the ground, and you can pick them up cheaper than you can buy them, in the bushel.
Did you ever help grade the apples?
Oh yes, during the war, Mr. Whitley couldn't find anyone to help pick apples because all the boys, they were in service, and all the men. And we had one gentleman that lived in our neighbor. He worked there, but he had to go on to the war after that. But my father, he showed us how they had a big long table with holes in the table, and you put your basket under the holes, and you picked out the right size of apples for the holes and put them down in the basket. And when you got a basket full, this gentleman, he would remove the baskets, and then we had to pack the top of them. They had a big packer for the top. They put the apples in a round ring until they got enough apples. Then they kept this big ring over the top of the basket, lifted off and that, and it had a perfect ring around the top of the apples.
Okay, can you tell us what would be some of your fondest memories about living in the Great Smoky Mountains?
It would be in the springtime when all the apple trees were blooming, and they also had an orchard. I mean a nursery, and azaleas. I can't remember, and daffodils, and I can't just remember all the different kind of bushes they had. But when they were all blooming, it just looked like heaven, you know. As far as you could see was white bloom, and then the azaleas were blooming under the apple trees. My grandfather and mother, they owned a land on 73, and the national park, they bought their land, and they moved to, my father, grandfather and grandmother went to Oak Ridge and bought, back then they called it Black Oak Ridge, and they bought a little farm down there. And then when the war came up, the government wanted to buy their land again, you know, to make an atomic bomb. So my grandmother, she wrote us a letter back with his children. She says, "Seems like I can't have a home. The government always wants it."
She really had a rough time.
Yeah, but it turned out okay when my brother, he was in the service, and he was in Japan. He was in the Navy. Awful rough, and we was wondering if he'd ever get to come home. And that's when President Truman decided to drop the atomic bomb. And so it wasn't long after that till my brother, he had to stay over there 6 months after the war, but it wasn't long after that till he got to come home. And we said if our grandfather and mother hadn't sold their land to the government, my brother might not never come home.
And what's your age?
Mary Ruth Zombie. And I was born July the 8th, 1936.
1936 would make you how old?
70 something.
I'd have to count that myself. We'll just take it 1936 as that. Okay, can you tell me where you lived inside the Great Smoky Mountains?
Cherokee Orchard.
Okay. How old were you when you left the Smoky Mountains?
8 years old.
Tell me some of the things that you remember about the orchard.
Well, I remember the road that went to Gatlinburg and how winding and crooked it was, and the crooked turns and everything. And all those kids would sit in the rumble seat.
That must have been a treat. And the roads were not very good quality then,
No,
were they? All bumpy and full of
no.
holes. And
They weren't too good.
so if you were just about 8 years old, did you do much work at the orchard, or did you just mostly play?
Play.
Tell me about how you played there.
Well, I can remember going out and walking around in the
You
fields,
can remember playing in the fields and getting, tell me about that.
seeing all the pretty Easter flowers. That's what we call them, Easter flowers, and everything like that.
Did you have dolls to play with, or did you have to make your toys?
Let's see, I don't think we had any dolls, did we?
Think you might have had some.
Yep, we might have had somebody might have made us a rag doll.
Sometimes they did in those days, didn't they? And I imagine the boys played with slingshots or flips? We used to call them flips.
Yeah, they did.
And did you have any pets when you lived there? Dogs or cats?
Mom always had cats, I think.
What about the apple trees? Were you in among the apple trees much?
Yeah,
Did you play there or climb the trees, or were you not allowed to climb the trees?
well, we did.
Can you remember any unusual stories about when you were growing up? Any bears or snakes, or even
Well,
just unusual people that might have come by when you were little? Or somebody that you looked up to?
Well, one time during World War II, my mother, she would walk 3 or 4 miles, 2 or 3 miles, down to our mailbox that was down on the road away from our house. And we'd usually go down to the field, apple orchard. And we walked down there one day, and me and Mama was walking along. All of a sudden, Mama pushed me back like this, and she said, "Look out, Ruth, there's a rattlesnake."
Oh my goodness. And you could hear them, couldn't you? If they do their rattling, you could hear them ahead.
She said it was singing at her feet.
I can't imagine a mother having to protect their children from things like that. I mean, that's something, isn't it?
Yeah.
What about the school? Did you go to school in the Smoky Mountains, or was that after you left the Smokies?
It's after we left.
Okay. What
We
about
couldn't go to school up there. There wasn't no school.
looking back on the national park and the apple orchard? What are some of your best memories, even though you were young?
I guess getting out and playing around. Just playing and running around everywhere.
It was a good playground.
Especially when the apple trees was blooming.
Oh yeah.
And there was a rock wall that went right out from the house in the living room, and it had a vine growing on it. And I like to go out there and sit and play in that rock wall.
Oh, see, that had to be a beautiful playground for a little girl.
Yeah.
Did you have other friends to play with, or was it mostly just your family?
Just my family.
Because everybody else had left, hadn't they,
Mm-hmm.
from the park? What would you tell some of your younger relatives, some of your younger nieces and nephews about, if you were to say the best thing about the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, even today, what would that be?
Today, or in the past?
Well, today, what would
Okay.
be the best thing about the Great Smoky Mountains?
I don't know, probably everybody can go visit anytime you want to.
Will you tell me your full name? Your full
My
name.
full name is Herbert Raymond Claybo.
And when were you born?
I was born 1911 in Sevier County. Now, if it don't say you don't say that, you don't take used it to. We didn't call it that.
What did you call it? Where you were
We
born?
just lived. We just had one mountain, Smoky. That is where you crossed to go to North Carolina. This down here wasn't the Smokies. We never claimed. We actually did, but we didn't claim.
Were you in a certain community though? Were you on Cherokee Orchard? Is that where you were born?
No, I was born up the road now, the forks across the creek to the bridge in a log house. There is where I was born.
And you're 97 years old?
I'm 97 and 7 months.
Okay. What was your mom and dad's name?
Well, my dad's name was William Sherman Claybo, and he was named after the General Sherman in Civil War. See, he was born to close the Civil War. He was named, got the Sherman out of the General Sherman.
And your mother?
My mother's name was Beatty Alice. Beatty was she was named after one of her aunts.
Herb, living in the Smokies before it became a national park, do you have any kind of favorite memories of hunting, bear, or fishing, or do you remember any panthers? Do you remember any stories about animals? Did anything ever happen to you with
I
animals?
remember one time, just pretty early in the morning, that we was eating breakfast, and we heard Dan, my sister, lived up a house above us, and we heard something squalling. Go through a squall once in a while. Well, we thought it was her kids my sister Alice's kids are coming down to my house. She sure didn't thought that some of us are coming up to her house. So we just let it go at that. Well, the thing moved on towards, we call it the Round Top or Winnie-Soki, and my brother got the shotgun after we got over there and took after it sort of to see if we could figure what it was. And he come to a laurel thicket, or we call it laurel rhododendron thicket, and it was in that thicket, and he said I didn't want to get in no fight with no cougar, so I didn't go in after it. But its squall was about like a woman that had a fine pitch voice. The squall sort of like a kid's hollering, you know. And that was one thing. Of course, when we lived up there, we never had no run-in. No bear didn't catch none of us. But anyway, hardly ever, because before that, the people that lived there, and even the Indians, here, I'm talking about 1800, back in 1800s, the Indians here, most of their meats was wild meats. So they had to pretty well kill that.
Had to move out, when your family had to sell their land, what year was that? Do you remember?
We moved out, well, first terrible, we moved up there in 1914. I'm talking on the head of the road park, right in the little grotto parking lot.
Yes.
1914, I was 3 years old. Then we lived there in 1933. Moved out in 33. Then, of course, the park took over in 34. But anyway,
did you come to Gatlinburg then?
we come back to we come back to the old house that we moved out of. I lived in it about 2 or 3 years. Then the park come along. One of my brothers bought an old house in the park, and we tore it down and moved it down here for my father and mother to live in after we moved out.
Would it have been on this farm you're living on today?
Yeah.
So
See,
this
if
is...
we lived here, I don't know, it might take too much time if I tell you how we got this. Old Isaac Oakley, Ike, Tom, Bill, and John, the 5 older boys that came here. One of them, Isaac, liked land. He had enough land that he gave all his children a farm. Where the others liked money, and this, that, you know how people are. Yeah. And the old Isaac Oakley entered this, give it to his sister, give it to his daughter, and her name was Margaret. They called it. All Margaret's was automatically nicknamed Peggy. They called her Peggy. They give it to Peggy. Peggy lived here. The house is about where we're sitting here now. She lived here as long as she lived, and she gave it to her son, which was Sherman. And Sherman lived here all his life except almost 20 years we lived up on the head of the road park. Then we moved back here because this house was entered, this farm was entered and never was sold. See, Isaac entered, he gave it to his daughter, he gave it to his father. His father gave me where we're at today, he gave me, that was my inheritance. It's just never been sold.
Before that, I hired Eugene Wilson.
Okay, and what year were you born?
I was born in the year of 22.
So that would make you how old?
86 years old.
Where did you live in the Great Smoky Mountains?
Well, I lived several places.
Well, first tell me where you were born.
Well, I was born on a fish camp. That's, I'd say about, probably about 12, 15 miles above Alabama.
Okay.
See, I was born way back in.
Now, Fish Camp is a part of the Little River Lumber Company operation?
Yeah, I was born on the Little River Lumber Company job.
Okay. What did your dad do for the Little River Lumber Company?
Well, he was most of the wood superintendent. He looked over skidders and the logging job part of it.
Okay. And you said you lived at several different places. Can you name in order where you moved to?
Yeah, we moved from fish camp down to Chase Creek. Well, we lived there a while. Then we moved to Tremont. We went up to Lynn Camp. That's on in the Tremont section. Then we lived on Sam's Creek a while, in Lynn Camp, and then we lived below Tremont, down below the store there.
What was it like living around the lumber camp operations? It'd be different than just living on a farm, wouldn't it?
Well, it's a lot different from living on the farm. Of course, now I was real small when we lived out there, and you'd see log trains going by when load logs on them, and they passed right in front of your house.
Yeah. Did you ever ride any of the trains up there?
Yeah, I drove trains some.
Did you? Were you?
It's the only way you had getting up in there some places.
So if you were moving, you might move by riding on a train
Yeah,
instead of walking.
yeah.
A lot of people already know about the houses and how they moved them, but you might want to tell about how they moved the houses from place to place.
Well, they had loaded load them logs on the train with. They just pick them houses. That loader just pick them houses up and set them on the box car, on the flat car. Same car that you used to haul logs on. They just set the houses up on them, and so they'd have a house seat built on. If it's moving Chase Creek, Tremont, the train haul them up there, and they'd just set them off on that. Set them off on their foundation already built.
So you just have all your belongings still in the house. You didn't have to pack them.
Oh yeah,
up.
they just packed their dishes and things. They'd wrap paper stuff around and so on. And you didn't pack and unpack. They just took your stove, dishes, cupboard, and everything. They just picked everything up, bed and all. Just picked it up and set it on that car, and then went and set it off. If you lived in a 4-house family, you had 4 rooms. If you wasn't much of a family, you had 3 rooms.
Do you remember anything else happening while you were there? Anybody getting hurt or any big floods or anything happening while you were there?
I remember the rivers getting up several times. Lots of times the rivers get up. We had a cow one time to keep the cow. And our cow's the only one come across the river, and she got washed down there and lodged in some laurel there. And Dad went down there and got her out. I was real small.
Did y'all have to cross the trestles and things to get from one place to another? The high trestles?
Yeah, there's usually a plank across the trestles.
Oh, okay. That must have been hard on a mother trying to watch after her children at a place like that with all the high trestles and the trains running by and the steep drop-offs and things.
Yeah, I'd say it's a big worry. Of course, they know about what time the trains come by, and then when they run, why,
went by, well, they didn't have to worry about the train no more, you see. But they did have to watch their kids about them being on them thrusters.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be scary. Did you start to school before you left the park?
Yeah, I went just a little while before I left out there. I went to that school down there at Tremont.
I guess it's just called the Tremont School, or was it a company school, or?
Yeah, it's a company school.
Was it?
They had, well, it drove the books. It had that one building there, the school, the church, and movie shows all the.
Yeah, just done everything in one building, didn't it?
Yeah, they had.
Did you just have one teacher, or did you have more than one teacher in that school?
No, one teacher's all they had.
Yeah. What did you take for your dinner at the school?
Well, the first day I remember taking peanut butter and sugar and a biscuit, I believe.
What would be a special memory of yours of living in the Smoky Mountains?
Memory of living in there. Of course, now kids have got different thoughts than somebody that had worked out there, you know. They worked in snow and ice, but to me, it just a good place to live.
Yeah.
I didn't know no other place to live, and I'd rather live there than anywhere. Still like to go back there.
Yeah.
Where I was at as a kid, you know.
Yeah.
I'm James Weldon Nation, and I was born on up a branch from Ravensford they called Height Run. I was born in 1926 and went to school at Ravensford for 5 years before we moved to PIgeon. The park run us off, in other words. They took our land and paid us $3 an acre for it. We had 22 acres of land on the top. Patch down there.
Yeah.
And he had it in corn.
Yeah.
And Mama went down there to hoe corn. And I was going down our tour. And I heard a bird hollering in the weeds. And I slipped over to peeping to see what was wrong with the bird. And that snake saw me and he took after me. And I run and I went down there where Mama was hoeing and I told her about it. So she said, "Shucks, you mean you'd run from a little old snake?" I said, "Yeah, and you would too." So she said, "Shucks, I wouldn't do it." So she started up through there with me and said, "Show me where it's at." So I went up there and got almost to where it was at and here it come. So she run too with that hoe in her hand. James Wade Carr. I was born June the 20th, 1925 in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park.
What section where would you below at Campbell Overlook?
Yeah, right there, just under where the highway is now, right down under the highway, that's Campbell Overlook.
Acres he owned?
Well, he didn't, the park owned everything, you know, he just had quite a few acres scattered around, patches around where we plant corn and potatoes and things like that.
And where did you go to? You lived there till you joined the Navy or the Army?
Marine Corps.
Did you ever work in the CCCs?
I was in the CCCs for, I'd say a couple of years, maybe 3 years.
Did you work there at the Sugarland CC?
Yeah,
What was your job? Do you remember what you did?
Well, taking care of the campgrounds and the area up in the park, you know, especially out on King and Snow. We had a lot of work out there.
Yeah.
When the weather permitted, we'd work out there all day.
And did your family want to sell their land to leave the park?
Really, I don't know the truth about that. I don't know how it was. I think they more or less just took the farm, took their land.
Yeah. And your dad had a big grist mill, didn't he?
Yeah, he had a grist mill.
Honeybees.
Did you help work in that?
No, I didn't mess with them bees so much. They didn't like me. But he had, at one time, he had over 100 stands of bees.
And what did he do with all that honey?
And after the park took over, all the tourists coming in, he would sell honey. He had a room built up in the house there, and would can honey and put it in quart fruit jars. Oh, he'd sell all he could put in there. Every summer, put a sign up on the road, and tourists would stop and they'd come buy that honey. My mom wasn't a weaver, but my sister and I done the weaving. I could weave those towels and what I did as good as she could. And so we had a room in the house. We'll have to keep all that stuff in that we made.
Your mom did chairs? Did she make chairs?
She would bottom use corn shucks and weave to make it.
As I spoke with Miss Maples about living in what's now the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, I said, what kind of memory do you have of living there? And she said, what I always remember about living in those mountains was the chestnut tree. Of course, Miss Maples has written a book about her memories of the Smokies, and she asked that I read her poem about the chestnut tree, which is entitled, Chestnut Tree, My Buddy. This is my beloved old buddy, the chestnut tree. Its many golden memories mean so much to me. On today's hiking trip, we found flowers all aglow. We were walking in our homeland we left long years ago. We find the tall, tall cliffs, they stand so proud and tall. We cross the silver streams of the misty waterfalls. We feel the cool spray, we feel its cooling touch. These are our beloved mountains we love so much. Here you hear all the songbirds, they sound so at peace. But it seems our smoky homeland is just out of reach. Here you see the old black bear as he wanders by the stream. This is our beloved homeland. We see so much in dreams. You find peace and contentment. It soothes the wearied mind. As you walk in our mountains, leaves worries far behind. This gray old chestnut tree once stood proud and tall. The nuts were delicious. They were liked by one and all. But death came to claim them. They faded one by one. The park now owns our homeland. We know that they have won. My old Betty chestnut tree lies here in silent sleep. I think back years, bow my head, and softly weep.
We're talking today with Miss Pearl Smelser, who lived up around the Greenbrier area in the national park.
The place they call Indian Creek. I didn't live over in Greenbrier. It's just across a mountain, up a holler to Indian Creek, And I didn't go to school in Greenbrier. I went to Indian Creek School.
Oh. Did you still get to visit these other women who lived in Greenbrier?
No.
Not much. Was it too far?
Well, yeah, you had to walk everywhere you went. And it's just too far to walk for.
Yeah.
And most everybody had a big family.
What was it like growing up in the national park?
Well, we didn't think nothing bad when it was up there. We didn't know there was anything but that.
Right.
Back during the Depression, and it was hard to get anything. In other words, we just hadn't bought enough to eat and bought enough to wear to keep us warm in winter.
During the Depression times, you just had what you grew on the farm, didn't you? Mostly. You didn't have a lot of money to spend in the store.
To buy stuff we couldn't raise, Sell eggs and stuff, buy coffee and sugar and stuff we couldn't raise.
Now, since you were about 12 or 13 when you moved out, did I ask you what year you were born? What year were you born?
1915.
Okay. What did little girls do for fun when you were growing up?
Climb trees.
Same as the boys, didn't you?
We'd get that grapevine swing from one ridge to the other. That's about all we had to play with.
What was in the woods.
Yeah.
I've heard my family talk about that a lot. I don't know if I'd been brave enough to swing on a grapevine or not, though.
Well, the Lord just good enough to take care of all of us. We didn't have no better sense.
That's true.
And we'd climb up in a tree and get over in the, or bend the top over and go down like that. Sometimes it'd break with us, but it didn't hurt us.
You were tough, weren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been tough all my life, this year lately.
Yeah.
And we used to live, it was a whole hillside, just sagebrush. We'd get up on top of that hill and lay down and roll over that sagebrush. How many snakes we could run over.
Well, see, I think children today are missing out, don't you?
Yeah.
I don't think they have as much fun as you all did.
I don't believe they do either because there are too much killing things going on now.
I know.
You're afraid to get out of the house.
I know. Did you have any bear stories or snake stories? You ever run up on a big copperhead or rattler or anything?
No?
The Lord was looking out for you, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
That's all it was taking care of us.
Yeah.
And you know, kids don't think of no danger. And me and the neighbors' kids, we just got there, and my half brother and sister, we just have a ball on them grapevines and
Did you have
sagebrush.
baby dolls, or did your mama have to make your dolls, rag dolls or something?
Mama didn't make them, and we didn't have none, because she had too much to do.
No time to look after that many children, did she?
Well, she had 8 in all.
Mm-hmm.
She said she's married twice, and she had 3 by her first husband, my sister, and a brother, and me. So they're both gone, just me.
Do you remember when you all moved out of the national park?
Oh, yeah.
How did you all leave? Did you have to put your belongings on a wagon, or?
Yeah, well, I don't know.
Don't remember that part?
Didn't have much
Are you
fun
glad
on
that there's a national park there now so you can go back and see where you used to live?
Yeah, I'm proud of that, but I'm not able to go back up there anymore.
Did you used to?
Huh?
Did you used to go back to your home
I used
place?
to go back up there every time. I remember going to school on Indian Creek. I remember that. Have fights with the boys and the girls. I'll just tell you everything I know.
Some things hadn't changed, have they? Boys and girls always go to pick at each other, don't they?
I used to wear a little old hat. Back then, most everybody wore hats. And I had a little old city hat on. She had us lined up outside to march in school. And this girl, she picked on me a lot. And my sister, when she quit school, I had to take my own part. Well, was that girl picked on me. She's about 2 or 3 ahead of me. She reached around there and she snatched my hat off of my head. Boy, I downed her there and we headed out.
If you had to, or if you were to tell your grandchildren what was the best part about living in the park, what do you think that would have been?
Well, it's not a real good place to live. Well, I don't think it is, but I love the park. I love to go back and see it.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't want to live there anymore.
It's not the same now that all your family's gone, is it?
Ain't nobody up there bears.
No. We're talking today with Miss Rena Ogle, who lived inside the national park. Where did you live inside the national park?
Right in the center part.
Is that right? What community?
Greenbrier.
Okay. And who were your parents?
Walter Omby and Lily.
Lily. And what was Lily's maiden name?
She was Whaley.
Okay. And if you had If you were telling your children what was the best thing about living inside the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in the Greenbrier area, what would you say that is, the best thing about living there?
Going to Grandpa Omby's.
Well, tell me about Grandpa Omby's.
Oh, we always had a good time when we went to Grandpa Omby's and Grandpa Whaley's.
What made it special to go there?
Well, I had friends to play with.
Okay. A lot of cousins?
Mm-hmm.
And what did you do for fun when you were there? What did you play?
We had those little cards that came out of soda.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd have 3, and then we'd play that. Or we'd play hop and sketch. And ride a horse.
Oh, who had the horse?
Grandpa Omby.
Oh.
But I'll tell you the funny thing about it. He didn't like for 2 people to ride on it, but I put the bridle on him that he couldn't see back.
Oh.
And so I thought that me and Aunt Val could get on it and ride it down to the road.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we got on it. There was a great big rock, and we got on that rock, and then we could get on the horse. But we went just a little ways, and the fence, there was a gate, or bars there. So the horse just stopped and shook a little bit, and I went one way, and Aunt Val went the next.
He knew what he wanted, didn't he?
Yeah.
One rider and one rider only. Did your family settle in the Greenbrier area, or did they move there from somewhere else?
Oh, no, they lived there when they got married.
Is that right? The Ormbys and the Whaleys both.
The Whaleys lived on the right-hand side of the river, and the Ombys lived on the left side.
Mm-hmm.
So they had a bridge that crossed, but we could go down a little ways.
Remember your grandma's cooking. What do you remember about that?
Oh, Grandma always had a lot to eat. She'd bake something every day.
Wow.
So we had good eats.
What did she make? Good gingerbread, or what do you remember in particular? Just all of it?
Just all of it.
Yeah.
She always had a table full of eats.
Hmm.
And what I liked best was her pies.
Oh. Did the grandmas used to make it seem so simple? They didn't use recipes a whole lot, did they?
Mm-mm. Not that I know of.
No. You just sit down, get out your flour bin, and open your flour bin, and get out your flour, and get your fresh milk butter and cow butter, and you just did it all from memory, didn't you? 12, when your family left the park, why did they leave the national park?
We had to, because the government had bought it.
As a young person, do you remember how you felt having to leave? Did you?
I didn't want to leave. I was having too much fun.
Do you remember your parents talking about having to leave? Was it hard on them, or were you too young to remember some of that?
Well, no, they didn't, because we was told to leave, and they knew they had to.
And how did you get that name, Zina? That's a little unusual.
My uncle from Georgia was up there, and he told Mama he wanted to name me, and he named me after a girl he was dating.
And he only gave you the one name,
Just
Zina?
one name, told me I could get. She said she can get her another when she gets older.
And you chose
Ruth.
And how did you choose that name?
Well, he had a sister, Ruth, and me and her got along together so good, and we loved each other. And so I said, well, just give me Ruth to my
Good name.
So we.
And I understand you grew up in Greenbrier.
That's right.
You know, I've heard people say, when we die, us folks from Greenbrier, we don't go to heaven. We just go back to Greenbrier because it is heaven. And tell me your mom and dad's name.
Well, it's Bill and Sally Whaley.
Bill and Sally. And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had 9.
Wow. Were they all boys or?
I made the 10th one.
You were the baby? Were you the baby?
I was the baby. I made the 10th. They was 6 girls and 4 boys.
Okay. And what was your job since you were the baby? Did you get off light or did you have to help Mama cook or what?
No, I didn't want to get off too light. I wanted to help my mama cook.
So,
the rest of them all went to the field to
Yes.
work and left me with Mama. And so that's where I learned to cook.
Wow.
She'd say, well, you do this, you can do that. And she taught me a lot while we was working like that.
And do you remember exactly where you lived in Greenbrier? Did you live to the right prong or of like going towards Ramsey Cascades, or did you live close to the Whaley Cemetery? Do you remember exactly kind of the location?
Well, there was a cemetery on our farm.
Was it the Whaley Cemetery?
I guessed that it was, but I never did say nothing much about it. I just wondered if it wasn't, but it was. Dad gave him the land when he moved. Somebody had started it, and he told him, says, just continue it on like you got it.
And did you go to church there in Greenbrier?
Yeah, we come back down to the Primitive Baptist Church.
And do you remember who your preacher would have been? Was he a circuit minister or did he preach there every Sunday?
They was mostly locals.
Yeah. Do you remember, I remember as a little kid, people shouting in church. Did they shout in your church?
They did that.
You don't see much of that today, do you?
No, you don't.
Did you have any kind of musical instrument in your church?
Well, we had an organ.
Oh.
And did you ever know Evelina Oimby?
Yes.
Little arms, little short arms like that. And she played
snuff.
that. Yeah. She used some snuff.
Did you ever try any yourself?
I tried a time or two, but I didn't stay with it.
Was you sneaking when you used that snuff?
I'd say, I'm going to try this. She said, well, you just try it, but you won't stay with it. And I didn't.
Well, do you have any favorite stories like a bear? Did a bear ever chase you, or did you see many bears up in the park or up in Greenbrier?
We didn't see too many of that close down as we were, but we could go on up above where Rena told you they lived, and we'd go on above there, and we could see the bears. And sometimes we'd just get in the wagon and go off up in the mountains looking for bears, and we'd see several bears.
Did you run from them, or were you
from? You better. They get you.
Like on Sunday, did you go to your grandparents' house for Sunday dinner or anything like that?
No, not a whole lot. I didn't have any grandparents at that time, and I was old enough to do that. I didn't have any grandparents.
Do you know how old you were when you had to move out for it to become a park? Do you remember having to move?
Well, I knew that we was packing and getting ready to move, and we had going to have to move, and then I got this throat trouble here. I had a abscess gland, and I had to come down here. And my brother lived right across the river here. I can see the house when it's not something in my way back there where he lived. And we come down there. Excuse me. And they called a doctor from Nashville, and he come down here and lanced my neck the first time. They said none of them undertake it. They said just a hair's breadth and I'd be gone. So they knowed somebody that they wanted to do it, and they called a doctor out of Nashville. And
Were you a young girl then when they did
I
that?
was about 13 years old.
Tell your family about living in those Smokies, your children or grandchildren. What would you tell them?
Well, I just tell them that it wasn't nothing any better.
Was it pretty?
And I'll tell you the truth about it, I hated to move out from up there.
Tell me your name, your full name.
Robert Edgar Williamson.
And what's your birthday?
April 30th, 1923.
And what part of the Smokies were you born in?
In the Cock County side. If you've ever been to Henwalla Falls, it's down just under the falls, just this very short distance. I lived in 3 places along that stream going down through there out of the park.
And what was your mom and dad's name?
My mother was Virgie Artell Webb. And my dad's name was William Oscar Williamson.
And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
Had 1 sister and 4 brothers. I count myself, I guess.
Yeah. And 1 sister?
1 sister.
Wow. You know, you told me something really interesting, and that was about the CCCs. Can you tell me a little bit about your family being in the CCCs?
Yes, we had 2 camps up there in the park. One Cosby and what we call Cosby, and one on Indian Camp. And we lived right in between the 2 camps. And my dad, he'd work there, and he'd go out in the woods, and he'd stay at home most of the time of the night, and he'd bring us sandwiches and things that the CC boys didn't eat. So we kind of lived off of that for a long time.
Wow.
And my granddad was in, there's 3 generations of us in. My granddad was a foreman.
And you told me you went to the state of Washington.
I went to Rainier, Washington in the 3C.
Did you stay very long?
Stayed a year.
A year. And why did you choose that area? Did you go on an airplane?
I had a choice. They wanted to know where I wanted to go, and I said, I want to go as far as you can send me. They said the West Coast, and I said yes. And they said, what state? I said, well, Washington's a little farther than California, so I'll take Washington.
And did you go by truck? Did you drive?
I went on a train, and it was a Pullman too. We got to sleep on the train.
Do you remember how many days it took you to get there?
About 7, I think.
You know, you told me that you were born in the Cosby area, and I just got to ask you this. You know, Cosby has a reputation for moonshine country. Do you know much about moonshine out in that area?
I used to know plenty about it. I kind of helped make a little of it when I was very young. That's one reason I wanted to leave home before the law got me.
So you think they would have eventually got you if you hadn't gone?
They're catching everybody.
Were they being sent to prison, or what were they doing?
They
You
sure
lived in the
was.
Smokies. Do you remember how old you were when they moved your house across the road outside of the national park? Were you a little older?
Not exactly, I don't.
Yeah, yeah.
But the 3rd time we moved out of the park, we just took our house with us. We had people to move our house across the road. They laid logs across the road and used jacks and everything. Had to tear the chimneys down, get them out of the way.
I think you're the only person I ever knew or ever talked to that ever moved their house. I heard a lot of them move, but never their house. That's interesting. Did your dad ever work in the lumber companies, or did you?
That was what he done in his younger days, was cut timber, but he's mostly over on North Carolina side, on what we call Big Creek, above Crestmont.
Yeah. Did you ever work in the lumber companies, or no?
No.
You were too young, I'm sure.
Had it all cut out. when I,
Since your parents didn't move but across the road, were they upset about having to move out for it to become a national park, or do you remember?
well, we were so poor that that's about as far as we could get. My granddad, I read in the Newport paper where it talked about him moving out, and he moved out the same day we did, so I guess he moved us. He had a wagon. We didn't have nothing but a sled. I guess he moved all his in one load and all of ours in one load. He lived in a park too, my grandfather. Both my grandfathers did. The Webb and the Williamsons lived there.
Did you have it go to church?
It's a long ways to a church, but
Yeah.
we had, back then, see, I went to school in the park. All my 8 years grammar school was in the park. There's not many that's done that.
No.
And my school teacher just died here not too many years ago, 3 or 4 years ago.
What was her name?
Valentine. She was a Huff.
Uh-huh.
Her dad was a doctor up there.
Yeah. Was you in a one-room schoolhouse?
No, well, you could make one room. It had sliding doors. It had 2 rooms actually, but you could open them up and just make one room.
So obviously there was a lot of kids that went to school.
Oh yeah, there's a whole lot of
Must be
kids out.
a big community when you was a kid. Was it?
Very close together.
Yeah.
They had to do something to make a living, because when they cut the timber out, you couldn't make a living out of them ground up there. And everybody's so poor they couldn't move out.
Yeah.
Well, there wasn't that many fields. Everything growed up rocks.
Yeah.
But I reckon they made whiskey back before then. They was making whiskey as long as I could remember.
Yeah. So that was just really a way to survive at one time, wouldn't it? Really survive.
It's either steal or make whiskey one. I'd rather go to penitentiary. It's unreal how many of them people have been to penitentiary up there. That's making whiskey.
Did they have to stay very long, many years, or do you even know?
Well, most of the time, a lot of times, first time they give them 4 months up there, but sometimes they'd get, if you got over a year, you had to go federal pen. How many whalers up there? There's a game warden come up there one time. I mean, a park ranger.
Yeah.
Stayed at college. His wife taught school down there.
Yeah.
But everybody before him, they still made whiskey in the park up there. And every time they'd find a steel, they'd cut it down.
Yeah.
Chop it up, destroy it. And they'd set park fire every chance. Bruce, Oldie's daddy. He'd be my uncle, my dad's brother. But he had somebody say something to him about fishing so much. He said, well, the good Lord wasn't covered there 3/4 of water if he didn't want us to fish 3/4 of the time.
I'm Lena Whaley Campbell, and my parents was Richard and Leola Lindsay Whaley, and they're from Greenbrier, and I was born in Greenbrier. And
what's your birthday?
June 17th, 1927.
How many brothers and sisters?
And I had 6 brothers and sisters. Had 3 brothers and 3 sisters. And I was born on what they call Laurel, and across, he's on Winfield, above Winfield Whaley's place. He was my great-grandfather, and I was born across the hill from the Lige Whaley Cemetery.
And you told me you lived in a shotgun house.
Well, best I remember, the house is what they call a shotgun house. It's 3 rooms just in a row, and it had a porch across the front and maybe one on the end of the house.
Living there in the Smokies, did you have a job? Did you have to go out and work in the fields, or did you work in the house? I know you're an awful good seamstress. How did you learn to sew?
Watching my
mom. We were
mama.
talking about church in the mountains, and you told me you had a story. What was you going to tell me?
Well, the church, the meeting had broke up, and they was all going back, shaking hands with people as they was leaving, and Frank Day, my step-grandfather, was carrying me. And all at once I seen this man with this big long white beard, and I screamed and I hollered and told Frank not to let Santa Claus get me. And of course he was embarrassed, and this old man was too. And he said, "Lord, let me out of here. I'm scaring the babies to death."
Do you remember who that old man was?
Not really. I'm not sure, but I believe it's Ishwali.
Wow. You know, Lena, I remember Mr. Day. I always called him Mr. Day and her Mimi.
Mm-hmm.
But I can remember him being in church services and shouting and sitting up front on the Amen corner. Do you remember those days when people
yeah. And I can remember Sister Nellie just a shouting and getting down on her knees and praying up at Laurel, and Frank a shouting and get out. A lot of the people was originally primitive Baptists, old Baptists they call them. But then I think the church split and it made it come into the
missionary Baptist.
Yeah. See, the primitive Baptist believes in washing feet.
Yeah.
But now the missionaries don't do that.
Yeah. I can remember Mimi telling me, your grandmother, about how the circuit minister would come to their house and spend the night on Saturday night, and how her brothers would load up the preacher's socks with soot from the fireplace. Do you remember ever telling that?
I never heard her tell that, but I guess some of her brothers would have done that.
Yeah.
But
and I also, do you remember when they didn't have any musical instruments in the church?
I remember that Uncle Miles Green wouldn't permit musical instruments in the church at Laurel.
Yes.
And I know that up in Greenbrier they didn't have. And then later some of the churches around had Mom was working in the garden, and Geneva was a baby, and Henrietta was she was the oldest. She's supposed to have been watching Geneva while on a pallet.
Yeah.
Blackberries had got ripe. And I decided to feed Geneva some of them, but she wasn't. Well, she was born in April, and
that was in July, early July.
Yeah, early July. The blackberries was ripe, and I was trying to feed her some of them, and I couldn't, and I got them on her face, and I decided just to paint her face with them, and I did. And Henrietta was out trying to help Mama, following around behind her, and she's supposed to have been keeping her on the pallet. She run back and hollered and told Mama what I'd done. I told them, of course.
You need a spanking for that?
The baby. And Gordon would be up the riverbank there. He's big enough to take a pole up that river and try to go fishing him in his diaper.
And he was wearing a diaper fishing?
Yeah. He was still in diapers, but he could walk, and he'd get up through there, and she'd say, "You'd better go see about that."
Did your family want to move out, or do you remember?
Well, we had a little place up there, and they sold it, but I think some of them wanted to move out, but they didn't realize till after they moved out how blessed they were to be up there. I mean, they had good water and all this stuff, but a lot of them moved out and was dissatisfied with. And I guess they got homesick.
And I'm here talking with Jean Dodgen Maples. And tell me your full name exactly. Do you have a middle name?
No, I don't have a middle name. It's just Jean.
Okay. And when were you born?
I was born May the 5th, 1924.
And where were you living when what part of the park was you in, or the Smokies?
at Husky's Gap Road, I guess about a mile or half a mile from
the Sugarland Visitor Center? Okay.
Well, but 2 miles from the Visitor Center is Husky's Gap Road, I think, and I was born somewhere across the hill from there.
Do you remember anything about what your house looked like growing up there?
Well, Mama always told me that I was born at the White House. It was, but it wasn't Washington, D.C. But anyway, she said this was a big house, but I remember seeing it in my later years. But now I can't remember who owned it or who lived there, but it had been a nice house in time.
Yeah. What was your mom and dad's name?
My dad's name was Charlie Alvin Dodgen, and my mother's name was Flora Whaley. She was the daughter of John Whaley.
And did they marry young, your mom and dad?
Mom was 17 and Dad was 19.
How many children did they have?
They had 8.
8.
8 children.
And how are you in the birth order? Are you the...
I'm the third.
The third.
Mm-hmm. Third.
And you told me you went to school there in the Sugarlands in that 2-room schoolhouse. That, by the way, something I didn't know, that it was part of Pi Beta Phi, that they ran that school. But since it's so close to Christmas, tell me about the best Christmas you ever remember having there in the Sugarlands.
One of the best Christmases that I can remember was at the school. We'd had a little play, and I was an angel. I played the part of an angel, and my mother had told me, though, that, and the rest of us kids, that we might not get anything for Christmas that year, that Santa might not be able to find us. It's so far back up in the mountains. But I remember so well this beautiful Christmas tree that they had. It had lights on it. It was candles, and they were lit. I'd never seen a Christmas tree because we'd never had one. But we always got, you know, candies and things like that. But this particular Christmas, I guess we were kind of sad because we didn't think we was going to get anything. They started giving out gifts and calling names, and I thought, well, there's no Santa Claus. There's no use me looking for anything. And I looked over at my sister Nadine. She had this doll in her arms, and she was just loving it up like this, just holding it and with her head thrown back, laughing. I thought, well, there must be a Santa Claus. And after a while, they kept giving dolls out to all of the girls around, and finally they came to me. I knew then there was a Santa Claus.
You also told me that you remember the day that Roosevelt came to dedicate the park in 1940, that a bunch of you school kids had been brought downtown Gatlinburg
Yes.
to see him go by.
Mm-hmm.
Around traffic light 3, was there a lot of excitement going on that day?
Oh, yes. There's lots of people standing out. We were waiting to see Roosevelt go by. Of course, when he went by, I didn't know which car to look at, but I remember it was a string of cars, and I was real thrilled. I thought, well, I saw the president, but I don't really know which one it was.
Your mom and dad was glad to move out of the Sugarlands, or were they upset about it, or do you remember?
Yes, I remember that. We were all saddened to move out. Of course, we knew it would be better for us because we lived kind of an isolated life. We didn't see too many people, only when we went to school. But that was home to us. That was the most beautiful place that we had ever been in or ever seen. My mother always... after she came back out, she always said, I'd like to go back and see the sun come up over Bullhead again. That was...
But when you moved out, you kind of moved into an area where other people, other relatives kind of
Yes, we did.
Wow. Was your dad a farmer?
Well, he did a little bit of everything. We farmed some. We had a garden, and he worked at Little River on the logging camp. At the logging camp, he'd stay over there, and then some years later, he worked as a surveyor. He worked when they was building the road
through the Smokies.
And he went still with the surveyors when the Depression came.
Did he lose his job
Yes.
in the Depression? Yes.
He did. But later, he was in the CCs.
Yes.
And we thought we were rich then because he made $30 a month.
Yeah. So did he not live with you all when he worked in the CCCs, or did?
Oh well, he came home at night. Yes.
No. Do you remember them working on that road, Jean? Do you remember them building the road over the Smoky Mountain?
Just remember a little about it because I was only 4 or 5 years old when we lived over close to where they were working on the road. But I remember the first colored person that I ever saw. It was a little girl, and I cried for Mama to let me get that little girl to play with me. I just loved the looks of her. And then later on, my uncle sent me a colored doll, and how I love that doll.
What do you think that little colored girl was doing here? Was her dad working on that?
Yes, he was working on me. Will always be dear. It's the most beautiful place. We always said if heaven would be something like the Smokies.
Yeah, Anna Mae Ogle Carver.
Okay, and what part of the Great Smoky Mountains did you live in?
Well, it was called the 2 Mile Branch.
And that's near the park headquarters, sort of?
Well, yeah, the road that turns up there it turns up to the left and goes past them riding stables.
Okay, okay. And tell
I
me,
reckon they're still there.
You know, I don't know. What about your parents' names? What are your parents' names?
Ezra Joseph Ogle was my daddy, and Annie Iota Ogle was my mother.
What was her maiden name?
Well, she was an Ogle too. They was both Ogles.
Okay, okay. And can you name your brothers and sisters?
Well, Stanley's the oldest, and I was next. And Alma, my sister, and Lester, and Muncie, Lloyd, and Edna. There's 7 of us.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about some of your best memories. What was it like living in the park, and did you ever encounter any bears or rattlesnakes or anything?
No, not while I lived up there. Now they got to coming out a little before we left up there. But up until I was 9 years old, I never was afraid of them.
Hmm. Were they more afraid of you?
I didn't ever see none.
Oh. Why do you think that is?
Well, they just it was just people living there, I reckon, and they just didn't come down much.
Yeah, maybe they were a little more
out
afraid.
of the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And when the park took over and they got to moving out, while the bears got to actually coming down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where did you go to school?
Well, I don't went to school there at Evans Chapel, but I don't know what the school was called.
Mm-hmm. Was it a 1-room or 2-room?
2 rooms.
Mm-hmm. Tell me something about your school days. Did you have spelling bees? What was it like going to school in the Smoky Mountains?
Well, it's about like it is going anywhere else, I reckon. I still in the little room it's called when we left up there. But my brother was over in Stanley, he was over in the other.
Mm-hmm.
And we just done like they do now.
Right, just go went and had your lessons, didn't you?
Yeah, and their recess and lunch break.
What did you take for your lunch?
Well, just whatever, whatever I could.
Did you take like potatoes and sausage or
Well,
you didn't
yeah.
have peanut butter and jelly, did you?
No, we didn't have peanut butter and jelly. We'd take rosinures, hot rosinures, and taters and stuff like that. Well, we tried to play house and played with dolls and stuff like that.
Yeah, I bet you spent a lot of time outside, didn't you?
And played tag and hopscotch. And
Oh yeah,
stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah. The boys made little flips or slingshots, didn't they?
Oh yeah.
That they'd shoot snake feeders and crows and things with. What were some of the chores you had to do at home? What was your job?
Well, I washed dishes, or I tended to my brother, the baby, and just done a little housework when I got big enough.
Mm-hmm. I guess you got water from a spring or a well?
Oh, well, spring.
Mm-hmm. And
Kept carry water right smart ways.
And kept your cold stuff cold in the spring box, did you?
Yeah. You had a box in front of it where the spring water run out into the box where we kept from melting butter.
Yeah.
Oh, we done that here after we moved here when I was 10 years old.
Oh yeah, that wasn't just in the Great Smoky Mountains, was it? That was all over the county, wasn't it? That was all over the county.
At that time it was, because we moved here in 1930.
Oh, did you? Yeah. If you were telling your grandchildren what the best part of living in the Smokies would be, what do you think that would be, the best part of living there?
Well, mostly the people wasn't so bad, thick settled, and you had to walk everywhere you went, but everybody else was just like you was, so you was happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd go to visit some of your neighbors, you had to walk.
But it was good, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and
to visit.
it's quiet and peaceful, and you didn't have no.
Did your family? I guess they enjoyed going back to the park though once they moved out.
Oh, they did. As long as they lived, they enjoyed going back up in there.
Yeah.
Walking back up in there just as long as they could. My mama talked about that. She was going on 95 years old when she died, and she still wanted to go back in there.
Mm-hmm.
And she'd get thinking every once in a while she could walk up in there, and she couldn't even walk across the house.
Oh, she just wanted to go to her home place
She
so
just
bad,
wanted
didn't
to
she?
go so bad.
Now I'm interviewing Melvin Carr, my dad, today. Can you tell me your full name?
Melvin David Carr.
And when were you born?
Born 1925, March the 7th, Nucleus County, Virginia.
Now, I understand your dad had moved out of the Sugarlands and gone there to buy a farm and do some tobacco farming, but you were born there, and when you were just a few months old, he found out he had tuberculosis and you moved back to the Sugarlands. Do you remember the house you first remember living in the Sugarlands, what it would have looked like?
The first house I remember living was a big 2-story white house down below the school about 300 yards, and across from it was the cemetery, and it had 2 stories, the canopy on each story, and I remember riding my tricycle around the canopies, and the first dead person I ever seen, it started raining, they brought him in on the porch, and later on I found out it was my granddad, to wait till the storm passed to take him out the cemetery. And then we lived there, I guess I was about 3 years old, and we moved out towards the river from the White House. It was a greenhouse and an old grist mill in the yard. a big weeping willow, and the footlogs across the river, it spreads out at that point. It's kind of an island-like. And we used to walk across those logs. They had rails on them when we would come to the other side to Mr. Bert Ogle's place. And we lived there a year or so, and then we moved up above the Camel Overlook at the first hill out of past that. The house was on top of that hill. As a little boy, I would come up to the road and watch Dicus is building the new highway across the mountain. A big steam shovel, and I thought it was something then. And the trucks was chain pull internationals. They'd haul about a ton. And they finally got it built with the tunnels and all, you know. But then we moved out when I was about 6 and a half.
When you lived there in the Smokies, I think if anyone were to ask about you, it would be that you were a Baptist minister, but also that you liked
Eastern
to
brookie
fish.
that gets to be a large fish, but the native brookie, about 12 inches or so, was about the biggest they got.
And do we still have those native brookies?
Yeah.
Where would you find them in the park today?
Well, in the upper streams, it's got waterfalls on them to keep the rainbow and brown down below, and they're up high.
The rainbow, you know, they say that the lumbermen brought them in here in the early 1900s, but you say they were already here.
Richard Whaley, an old deacon, told me that his dad, Richard would be way over 100 now, but he told me his dad caught rainbow in Greenbrier, and that would have been close to 150 years ago. But the park don't have it on record, and they don't know because they didn't have it on paper.
Being a little boy when you moved out of what's now the park, do you remember, did your mom and dad want to move, or were they pretty upset?
Well, I don't remember that part of it. They seemed like they were because they bought a farm over here close to some people that lived close to them up there.
The Quilliams family?
Yeah, yeah.
And the Quilliams family lived at Courthouse Rock, didn't they?
Above Courthouse Rock.
As a little boy, did you ever go up and visit with him?
No, but later I walked up there and looked the place over. They had a beautiful spring laid up out of little river rocks, you know, sandy in the bottom, big spring, good water. And their house was plumb gone, and their barn was back against a cliff, and it had fell down. And old man Joe had a beard down to his waist. We kids would gather up around him and get him to tell us stories.
Was this after you'd moved out?
No, up in the park, and after we come out too, over to Quilliams's, you know.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, he told us about sitting on the porch one day resting at lunchtime, and he said there's a big gray cat laying on a stump out there in front of the house. And all at once he heard a commotion. He looked out there, and a big hawk had come down and got that cat and went right back up out of sight. Him was sitting on the porch. He said feathers was falling after a while. He said that here it come, the cat and hawk, and hit the ground. And the cat had killed the hawk, and the cat run on the floor. Yeah. But I guess the hawk thought he was getting him a squirrel, and he got that cat. And that
But your Uncle Jim stayed in what's now the park till the 50s, didn't he?
He was the last man to leave the Sugarlands.
He had a big grist mill there below Campbell Overlook?
Yeah, a little grist mill down below the Campbell Overlook. And they ground their meal, had their cows, and had all those bees. He'd sell $35,000 to $5,000 worth of honey every year from his bees, the tourists, you know, after they got to coming through. And he could sell all he could make. And he had 150 stands one time, I think. And he worked at it all the time. And that at that time, that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
People that just wasn't no money back then.
Yeah.
Dad bought a 29 Chevrolet, the best, and 4-door for $695
While he was in the Sugar Land.
in the Sugar Lands, and that wouldn't pay the tax on the cheapest now, would it?
No. Did he ever drive it, or did he get so sick that your grandpa?
Well, my mother drove it most of the time, but he got in it one day and knocked the back end of the garage out. But it was a good car. It was 2-seated, 4-door, and
Do you remember riding in it?
oh yeah. Between Gatlinburg and PIgeon Fords, there's little 2-track roads around those bluffs.
Yeah.
I'd look out that window to scare me to death. Mama driving. People come out of Knoxville and buy our blue plums.
Would they come right to your house?
Yeah, and pick them.
Wow.
And we didn't have to spray the apple trees or nothing. Peach trees.
And why not?
There wasn't no insects then. They come in later after World War I and on up to World War II. They come in pretty bad. And big planes and ships traveling brought in different insects.
Oh.
And they got started here. I guess it was kind of like a promised land when they first come to this country.
Yeah.
And everything was just luscious and great.
Effie, Arletta, I was a prophet till I married Collins. Yeah, I was born up there in 1919, August 10th. And my dad got his leg broke at the same time. And he laid in the bed. He said he laid in the bed and Mama would have to do all the work. And he said I rolled her backwards and forwards across my stomach.
You lived inside the national park?
The park wasn't up there then.
You lived in the Webbs Creek community?
Well, yeah, well, it was about 2 miles from where we lived to the Webbs Creek church house.
Oh, okay.
That's where my mother and daddy's buried and my little sister's up there.
And
We'd
so-
walk up there to Sunday school and church every Sunday morning.
Did you? Was it a Baptist or Methodist church?
I think it's a Methodist.
Maybe. Okay.
I don't remember.
What were your parents' names?
Elmer Prophet and Zeta McCarter.
What were your chores or your jobs you had to do as a little girl?
I had to help get the wood in and chop stove wood when I got big enough. And feed the chickens, gather up the eggs, go feed the hog. And just when they was out working, sometimes be late when they get in. We'd go in from school. We went in from school one evening and it was getting dark. And I think, well, Mama always, when new potatoes come in, she always boiled some for supper. Had this iron, you've seen them iron kettles, ain't you? I put that kettle in that stove and put water in and washed them potatoes and I put them on. And I watched her make bread. So I sifted me some meal. She always put a little flour in it. And baking powders and soda and salt and some buttermilk. I made that bread up when I couldn't reach the stove.
Oh.
I had to get me a dynamite box to stand on to put the bread on.
Oh my goodness.
So I had supper on when she come in.
Did you have very many illnesses that required a doctor?
No, not only when I was I just barely can remember it, when I was about 5 years old. That's when a lot of kids died of that. They called it the bloody flux back then.
And they had to call for the doctor then?
Yeah. He'd been down there to see me, and he went on up there to Myrtle's, to Webbs Creek. My aunt lived up there, and my grandma was up there. And he told him,
He said, if you want to see her alive, he said, you better go today. He said, she won't be here tomorrow. That was Doc Huff. He was a good doctor, too. He lived out towards Cosby.
So they called for another doctor then, or took you to a hospital, or what did they do?
No, they didn't take you no hospital. Wasn't no hospitals then.
Oh.
No, he just gave me some medicine and this old ending. My grandpa worked with in North Carolina, used to work on them lumber woods.
Mm-hmm.
There was an ending. He told him how bad I was. They wrote him a letter, and they told him how bad I was. And my grandpa wrote my dad back a letter, and he got it that day. They sent him and told him, said, go take you a mattock or something and dig some dewberry briar roots. And you had to wash them, scrape them. Said, make her some tea out of it. So Papa went and took a lantern. I remember him taking a lantern and going over on that little hill, digging them briar roots. Mama made the tea and gave it. Next morning I was better.
When you worked working, what did you do for play? How did you play?
We made us a playhouse. We'd find us 2 bushes that had forks on them. We'd put us some sticks up on them. We'd lay sticks across it, little sticks up and down it. We'd rake them leaves, some pine needles, and cover it. It didn't leak in there. And we'd make moss for our dogs' beds, get this moss and make our dogs' beds. And huckleberries and gooseberries growed up there. We'd pick them one day and we'd take a little sugar. We had a jar, take some water. We'd put them in that water and put sugar on them like today. And tomorrow, me and Ede's one, the Edith's one, done that. We'd eat them tomorrow then.
Bet they were good and sweet.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. When Mom and Papa was married, see, it was 2 years before my sister was born. And they stayed down there at my grandma's. That's where Jackie lives, in that old house. Till Mama got able to go home. It's about half a mile, maybe a little more, to where the house was out there. So they went home one evening. It was in December. She was born 12th of December. And they went home. And of course, the people had straw ticks back then on their beds. She had up an extra bed. And after they went to bed, they had a chimney, a fireplace, and had a fire in it. After they went to bed, they heard something out there in. Papa said, oh, it's an old dog hunting in them buckets for something to eat or something. Mama said, well, there ain't been nothing sold out here in a month. Said, there ain't nothing out there. So this about that time, it lunged against the door. He jumped out and grabbed the door, and that button that was on it, that had buttons on the doors, was a big 20-penny nail. And it liked about that much of knocking that out of the wall. And Mama made him keep fire all night. And he went to that other bed, they had slats on the bed. He got one of them slats, nailed it to the floor, and nailed it into the door. So that it was a panther. And then it went off down there at that spring. The spring's about as far as from here, a little further from here out there at that road. And screamed. It was a black panther. And it's the same one that when Sam Rowland was carrying the mail, it followed him across that hill or where Fairview School is. He said he'd turn around with his whoop. Said he'd be gone up on the high bank just like lightning. It followed him on his horse.
Did you meet your husband up there when you lived in the
mountains? Yeah, he was in CC camps up in Greenbrier.
Is that right?
And my neighbor lived down there. She sent her daughter up there one Sunday. We just did eat dinner and got back from church.
She told Mama, said, Mama wants Effie to come down there. She wants to see her. Mama said, what for? She said, she didn't tell me. She said, she just wants to be, well, they was cousins, you know, and it's just straight down through the field after they made a straight road. And Josie, that was her Mama's cousin, was the one who wanted me to come down there. My husband's friend had went to see Cassie, that was her daughter. So he didn't have no girlfriend, my husband didn't. And she was wanting me to get with him.
She's going to make a double date, wasn't she?
Yeah. And we went down to Pittman. They had singing every Sunday evening. We went down there, and he had a little old car. You know, they wasn't allowed cars in the CC camps. You know, they wasn't allowed. But someone's house he left it at up there in Greenbrier. He had his little whippet. It was, I don't.
My full name is Roy Glenn Cardinal, but I usually go with Glenn. That's named after a boy that lived here in the community at the time of my birth. My mother said, well, he's a good boy, and I thought you might be as good as he. That's why I wanted to call you Glenn rather than Roy.
And where did you live inside the Great Smoky Mountains?
Well, twice. It was just inside the Greenbrier area. Indian Creek first, and then right up here at the 321. And we sold out the year I was born in 1930. We moved down to the entrance area and lived there until 1939, September 1939, and then we rented $1 per acre per year for almost 9 years, and moved out on down the valley here in Emerald's Cove.
You didn't move far, did you?
No.
No. Yeah. How old were you when you left the park?
Almost 17.
Almost 17. So you spent your young life inside the park.
My happiest years was involved in living in the hill slopes and valleys and in the creeks and valleys and water. Where I lived, I could see, I had neighbors' houses that we could see, Kimsey Whaley's house and Aaron Husky's house, and then the Burnham house and the Price house and the Hoffman house. We lived on a ridge, so we were kind of promontory point, so I could see all the distance. The nearest store closed out in the 30s, and that was right up there, about a half a mile from the house. So when it closed out, and the man that operated it was living in the park. That was Bob Price. So he closed the store, and we had to go down to Pittman to Sam Brown's store or to the Goodwill store that the Methodists had established on the premises of the campus of Pittman Center.
And the other things in the community, Mills, churches?
Mills Creek Church was here forever, as far as it goes back to 1885, but the Candle still had a store there right at the entrance to Greenbrier, and there was a hotel and a school still operating in Greenbrier, which closed down in 1936. The attendance got too small, and the school board were not paid anymore for a salaried teacher. So the year that the hotel moved out, closed down, Hotel LeConte, and the school closed out, that kind of left only the CCC camp in the upper reaches. But I remember a lot of the other places up there, but most of the people, business is at closed out, except Bob.
Now, so in years to come, your father, I imagine he and your mother, did they decide that yes, it was a good thing, or that the park was established?
Finally, my father, I may have told you this before, but my father took him back on his 85th birthday, and he was having such a good time. And the best gifts in life you can't wrap up, and that was one that I couldn't wrap up, but I really got more joy than watching him. And I said, aren't you glad that you've lived long enough to see the beauty of these mountains restored? And he said, yes. He said that I resented the park movement coming, not so much of buying land. He said, shoot, you could buy a farm anywhere, but he said you can't buy back a neighborhood that you loved and were knitted together and fell apart of. But he said to me that day, he said, I'm glad that I've lived long enough to see the beauty of these hills restored, and there's no trespassing signs to keep me out. I can come anytime I want to.
Tell us your father and mother's names.
My father was Bill or William Preston Cardinal. My mother was an Opal, Pearlie Ethel Opal. She's the daughter of Noe, preacher Noe. There were so many Noe Opals, they had to give panels to them. I mentioned he was a mechanic. He bought one of the first cars, he said, that went into Greenbrier, and he said he just kind of learned how to break it down and put it back together, and which became a trade because then the tourists later on, after Arthur Stupert began to conduct nature drives and walks of this way in Bearville, one of the cars would break down, and my father would have to go fix it enough to bring it back to the house, and I'm deviating, but anyway, that's where I learned who tourists was. They were from
high over the hills, the mountains rise, their summit towers toward the sky, but far above them I must dwell, or sink beneath the flame of hell. O Lord, prevent it by thy grace. Be thou my only hiding place. O may I rise on wings of love and soar to that bright world above. And if prepared, O blessed thought, I'll rise above the mountain's top, and thou be forever blessed. Find peace and everlasting rest.
Veta and I would like to thank all the people in the video for their sharing of their Smoky Mountain stories and their families that have passed on the legacy for all generations to come. I say happy 75th birthday to America's most visited national park, Great Smoky Mountains.